Hi guys, I'm Blakely Davis. In this video, I'll be dissecting my multimodal analysis of Francisco Stork's young adult novel, Marcelo in the Real World. The whole purpose of this project is to turn the book on its head, break it down, and determine whether or not Marcelo in the Real World should be deemed a single story or not. As a brief introduction to the novel, Marcelo in the Real World is about 17-year-old Marcelo Sandoval. Marcelo is somewhere on the high-functioning autism spectrum. Marcelo's father, Arturo, is a big dog lawyer in Boston. He approaches Marcelo and offers him a deal. Work with me at the law firm this summer, and you can pick where you go to school in the fall, Patterson or Oak Ridge. Marcelo's summer at the firm ends up being way more complicated and difficult than anyone could imagine. I enjoyed this novel for a list of reasons. Marcelo is a likable narrator, and this novel provides insight into the lives of people who are on the spectrum and destroys a lot of the stereotypes about how these people navigate the same world that we do. However, I feel as though the novel destroyed what it had built up to and ultimately missed its mark at the end. It seems as though this novel rejects the reproduction of single stories throughout. However, the last blip of the novel backtracks to becoming a single story. This is not to say one can't enjoy the book as a whole, it's just that readers should be aware of the single story Marcelo in the Real World reproduces by the end. To begin, I sat down and thought about the best way to construct my argument. Although the novel involves a ton of internal and external conflicts with Marcelo and those around him, at the forefront is Marcelo's struggle with the notion of justice and what that would mean for Ixtal and his father. With that in mind, at the focal point of my project is a depiction of the scales of justice. While these scales represent that notion of justice, they also act as a visual depiction of Marcelo's internal conflicts and the decisions he must make and how they will affect himself and others. On the left-hand side, I drew Marcelo standing in the middle. With thought bubbles, I show the question he debates with himself as soon as he realizes the implications of that photo he found in the trash, shown below the left side scale. Is helping the girl and betraying his father really the right thing to do? In doing so, Marcelo would fail at his duties at the law firm, attend Oak Ridge High, and join what Arturo calls the real world, as shown by the planet I also drew beside Marcelo. On the right-hand side of the scale, I have depicted what Marcelo might selfishly have considered a success in his own eyes and the eyes of his father. The handshake represents his interactions at the firm, learning to communicate and operate in this real world. They also represent his potential relationship with Wendell, who I also depicted at the bottom right corner of my project. By making a successful deal with Wendell, he would make his father happy. However, as readers know, Wendell's intentions are pretty evil, and Marcelo battles with making his father proud, making Wendell happy, attending Patterson or not, and also by being a good friend and person to Jasmine overall as well. I have also depicted my take on the Vidromech logo right above Arturo. By pushing that photo aside of Ixtal, literally and mentally would mean assisting his father and his father's client, Vidromech. But Marcelo again tackles this issue of the unjust nature of this case. By staying loyal to his father, that would mean that his father would have the income that allows him to attend Patterson, which I also depicted by a horse on the right side scale. Overall, the right side of the scale depicts imagery and situations that would be deemed successful in the eyes of Arturo, Wendell, and in some ways Marcelo, but again, Marcelo questions at what cost. In regards to the quotes, my intention is that viewers would read from left to right, top to bottom, ending with the bottom right, obviously. I have compiled varying quotations that build up to the last one in the bottom right corner. With Arturo's voice in some and Marcelo's internal thoughts and external interactions, the quotes I chose build up this challenge against Stork's novel being a single story, while the last few ensure its identity as one. Much like how the novel is structured and concludes, my project presents in the beginning quotes that make the reader question the meaning of what this real world is and what disability truly means in the hopes of the author debunking it. But the novel ultimately ends with conformity and adherence to the expectations of this real world. Starting at the top left corner, I will begin my argument's defense with a quote from Arturo. After laying down the ground rules of Marcelo's summer at the firm, Arturo makes a controversial statement that reads, "But this summer you must follow all the rules of the real world," which I highlighted in a colored marker. This quote allows the readers to immediately question Arturo's meaning by this. Was Marcelo not a part of the real world at Patterson? Must he really work in the mailroom at a law firm, of all places, to grasp what the real world entails? This quote by Arturo allows the readers to question the whole basis for this experience Marcelo is about to endure and their own meaning of the real world. Hopefully, noticing the tone-deaf nature of this quote by Arturo, readers will realize this is Stork building up his basis for rejecting single stories about people with disabilities needing to assimilate according to the people around them. Next, I included a quote from page 63. This excerpt involves some of Marcelo's thoughts. He was just told that his father described Marcelo as having a cognitive disorder to those at the firm. Marcelo is confused by this and tells the readers that as soon as she leaves the room, I decide to check out the term cognitive disorder on the internet. It cannot be that Arturo thinks I have a cognitive disorder. All my life, he's fought against anything that separates me from the normal. At face value, this quote works to question Arturo and his parenting. It makes the reader upset at Arturo and sympathetic towards Marcelo. It also proves that Arturo has always tried to reject Marcelo's condition rather than embracing it for what it is. Again, this quote kind of works to reject that idea of a single story. The readers get the idea that Marcelo will prove his father's notions wrong, as well as the people at the firm. Moving on, at the bottom left corner, I've included a quote from Marcelo that goes, "All I can think of now is that it is not right for me to be unaware of that pain, including the pain that I inflict on others. Only how it is possible to live without being either numb to it or overwhelmed by it." This quote is where I started to question the possibility of Marcelo in the real world being a rejection of a single story. Although obviously Marcelo's work with Ixtal's photo is incredibly admirable, this quote stuck out to me because it subconsciously makes the reader question if Patterson really was granting Marcelo that exposure to the world that Arturo claims he needs. However, as readers know, Marcelo was not sheltered from pain and suffering at his time at Patterson. In fact, he lost his childhood best friend. This fact alone makes me question why the author would include this blip that insinuates Marcelo is now aware of pain and suffering and somehow wasn't before. Concluding his time at the firm is giving him exposure to needed lessons that he couldn't get at Patterson, according to his father. Moving to the top right corner, I included a response by Arturo. After Marcelo claims he cannot do certain things like walk by himself, Arturo replies, "Maybe the reason you can't do those things is not because you are not able to, but because you have not been in an environment that challenges you to do them." Although this quote adheres to the way Arturo is and thinks, this quote also insinuates that Marcelo isn't getting what he needs at Patterson. It almost makes readers assume that Marcelo can't do these things not because of his disability, but because he hasn't been challenged at Patterson. This quote makes Marcelo in the real world teeter closer to becoming a single story. In addition, right below I've included another quote by Arturo that goes, "A law firm is not like Patterson. In a law firm, the environment is competitive, people will be testing you." Again, this quote strictly expresses Arturo's opinions. However, like the quote last discussed, it is another building block that helps the reader to assume that somehow Patterson, a private school geared towards kids like Marcelo and his needs, is somehow not sufficient for teaching him lessons about the real world. It's pretty unfortunate that Arturo feels like the epitome of real-world experience for Marcelo is collaborating with people like Wendell and not learning lessons by working with horses, or being surrounded by other kids who have some of the same or different experiences as himself. In conclusion, these quotes join together to create a single story rather than break one down. Below that quote is a quote by Marcelo where, speaking of himself, he says that he will spend the next year at Oak Ridge High. Although Marcelo is ultimately going to Oak Ridge as a result of failing his father's expectations for his summer at the firm, this quote shouldn't be ignored by readers. Although it is admirable that Marcelo is ready and willing to accept his punishment for failing at the firm, it is important for the reader to question if this was truly necessary and if it proves the notion that this novel is a single story. Again, why must Marcelo go to Oak Ridge when Patterson is completely adequate? But with the past quotes and ways Marcelo has taken on this real world at this law firm, readers at first may accept Marcelo's fate as fair. But in all honesty, it just backtracks on and diminishes the role Patterson has had on Marcelo in his life. The way I interpreted Marcelo's decision to do the just and right thing wasn't a result of him hanging around Wendell or filing mail with Jasmine. To be frank, Marcelo wouldn't be the person he is had he not gone to Patterson. I think this is why I have a problem with this single story narrative, because who's to say Marcelo would have helped Ixtal had he gone to a normal school his whole life like Oak Ridge? Again, this conclusion diminishes the role schools like Patterson have on kids like Marcelo. To conclude, when Marcelo is telling Jasmine his plans for the future, he says, "It will be 5 years before I can be a nurse. I plan to work with the children at the medical center you took Amos to. I don't have to wait until I get a degree to do that. I can start right away as a volunteer. And with the ponies, I'll get a job at Patterson this year." This is the ultimate adherence to a single story. As discussed in class, Marcelo has gone through all of these experiences that have been incredibly emotionally draining and exhausting. Not necessarily in regards to helping Ixtal, but in the regards to his experiences with Wendell, some of his dad's colleagues, and the harsh environment of corporate law. It is incredibly frustrating for Marcelo to go through these unnecessary lessons for his dad's sake, only to end up conforming to the normal. Even though his plan is admirable and aligns with his interests, it is still interesting that Stork would have Marcelo be the exact thing his dad controversially wanted him to be: normal. Not to question Marcelo, but it must be asked why Marcelo couldn't just stay at Patterson and work with horses, when it has been incredibly beneficial to him up to this point. Overall, Marcelo in the Real World builds itself up to be a counter-story about a kid with high-functioning autism doing what's right and defying the stereotypes and expectations those around him have, especially his dad. However, at the very end, Marcelo ends up assimilating to this notion of the real world and confirming to his dad's belief that Patterson and Marcelo's life before the firm wasn't somehow real life. This denial of the role Patterson and the teachers and peers surrounding Marcelo have on him, Marcelo's conformity at the end of the novel, and the confirmation that Marcelo's experiences in the real world were necessary lessons and those at his specialized school were not, ultimately makes Marcelo in the real world a single story about disability. In regard to this project as a whole, the biggest challenge I had was trying to organize my argument visually. I spent the past 3 years in college and a good handful of years in high school and junior high strictly making arguments through essays and words. The most visual it ever got in my classes was maybe a PowerPoint with a stock image in the corner. So this project was challenging in that I kind of went into some unfamiliar territory to construct my argument and had to think about image organization instead of paragraph order. Although it was new and challenging, however, this project was really refreshing and broke up this routine of argumentative essays I've been in for the past few years.